Let me go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Blake Bradford. I'm a district superintendent from Arkansas. I know you were hearing me talk and you already thought, no, I thought Massachusetts, but there you go. But actually, DS from Arkansas. Before I was a DS, before I came over to the dark side, I was a church developer, and my real focus actually was clergy formation. Did work with Board of Ordained Ministry, things like that. And before I did that conference office stuff, I was a pastor in different sized churches, and in more rural Arkansas, and county seat size cities, and metro Little Rock. Different contexts, different sized churches, different roles: associate pastor, a student pastor, solo pastor, and then with whoever we could kind of gather to do stuff, and a senior pastor. I mean, just kind of different roles, different context, and a lot of different perspectives on ministry. I think I did ministry with integrity as myself, but I had to live into different roles for different sized churches to be effective and fruitful and to lead the church into fruitfulness. Because it wasn't about me, it was about the kingdom. And it wasn't about what the church wanted to do, it's what God needed the church to do. And so we had to discover a lot of that together. And so the resources for today are about busting through growth barriers, because churches get stuck. They get stuck for a variety of reasons we're going to talk about. They get comfortable very easily, and when we get comfortable and get into that lazy boy of a pew and become pew potatoes, it's kind of hard to get back going again. And so that's what this conversation is going to be about today. Again, as I said earlier, I do have the slides and the handouts and everything online, and I encourage you, just download those. I hope they're helpful to you. As we get started, though, let's start with the word of prayer. Dear Lord, all throughout our countryside, there's so many churches, so many different sizes of church, and we know, Lord, that the size is not about numbers. What we're talking about is souls. We're talking about transformation that can happen in people's lives, disciples who are made, and communities that can be transformed through the catalyst of churches. So Lord, be with all of our congregations that are represented here. Be with the churches across the country that you need to fulfill your mission and make an impact, a God-sized impact, God, for you and for Jesus Christ. This we ask in the name of Christ. Amen. So to begin with, the size of the church is not just a number. Ministry does actually happen differently in different sized congregations. And that needs to be stated up front. And I want you to hear in that, I didn't say better. I didn't say worse. I didn't say more vital. I said different. Different kinds of ministry. You go about ministry differently. What I mean by that is the organizing culture of a congregation and the role of pastor changes. It's lived out differently in different sized churches. And I want to go start with the word of scripture around this. And when we talk about growth barriers, because while it's a descriptive statement to say it's different, what happens when you're changing size? You're growing larger or smaller? And I'm going to frame a lot of what I'm talking about in growing larger because, yeah, we have some churches that are not. In fact, most of them aren't. But my heart is for churches that are trying everything they can to get beyond what the comfort level is. So you're going to hear a little bit of both, but I'm going to lean toward growth because it is busting through growth barriers. This is not a class about shrinking churches. So I think we're fine with that. We don't need a seminar. So Acts 6, it is a story of ministry allocation. It is a story about using your staff well, right? Acts 6, what's happened? We have a pastoral care emergency, right? Or maybe not an emergency. We have a whine. We have a complaint. Pastoral care is not being done correctly in this church. The church has stopped growing. People are writing to the DS saying the apostles aren't doing their job. You get the idea. The Greek widows were not being served well. The Greek-speaking widows. So the apostles had a choice. they could decide that the ministry is theirs. And they're going to hoard ministry, and they are going to be the ones that control the extent of the ministry. And if it can only go to the edge of their fingers, that's exactly where ministry is going to end. Or they could share ministry. They could be in partnership with others. They could talk about growth and growing and changing the role of apostle and the role of what would now be called the new diaconate. And so 7 folks were selected and commissioned, and ministry, instead of being hoarded, were shared. And the next passage of Scripture, and I just love this, it talks about many priests became obedient in the faith, and the church grew. In other words, the church wasn't growing because we weren't allocating ministry well, we weren't resourcing others, we weren't equipping others. We put a fake cap on what God could do and it was ego-based or something. It was people-based. We released that, and God's ministry grew. Most growth barriers are reliving out this story. It's going back to Acts 6. It's about congregational relationships and resource allocation, which I know is a kind of funny way to be kind of, using these 21st century words back on Scripture, but we need to be able to read it like that. And so really what I'm talking about here is knowing how to right-size your church's systems for vitality for your current church and the next step that you see. And I'm going to get to the next step in a second, but first I'm going to be more descriptive before I get into the next step stuff. So descriptive-wise, right-sizing your system. That fish isn't a very happy fish, right? And I tell you what, I got a lot of churches that look like this too, and they're lost in the big bowl. I have churches that are trying to keep up with the Joneses or keep up appearances as if they had 250 in worship. And they have the ministry pace of a church with 250 in worship. And they have the committee structures with 250 in worship. And they're trying to do things like, I heard one church, a month-long pumpkin patch with 18 hours worth of volunteers every day, man in the booth and all that. And they have 35 people now. And they wonder why they're burned out. Well, they're not right-sized. And they sure won't be able to grow because they've been running. They're all burned out now. There is a sociologist from Oxford, Robin Dunbar, who wrote some stuff back in the 90s about the Dunbar effect. And you may have heard about this. You can look at actually some of the stuff on Wikipedia. It's interesting because it's cross-cultural, and it tells a story about how people relate to each other. So big churches, small churches, all in between. We're going to live out some dynamics of this because this research is based on how humans relate and engage each other. So when we talk about like really large churches, what we're really talking about is several of these communities hooked together. When we talk about Sunday school classes, we're talking about certain sizes of these linked together. You get my point. This is how humans relate. So the smaller group is the decision-making body. Now, I know we all have 9-12 members on all these committees because, you have to fill in the forms, right? How many people actually show up to a meeting if you're doing well? About 7. 7's a good decision-making number. If any of you went to Kay Cotan's workshop on simplified structure, you'll notice she was pushing 9-person boards because that's a decision-making size. That's how many. After that, you start getting in, your board becomes a care and support size, which we'll talk about in a second. And we spend so much time caring and supporting each other, we forget to make decisions. And we can't hear all the voices to make decisions, too many people in the room. So decision-making group, that's one of the core pieces. The next size up, and I find it fascinating, that's about the size of Jesus' disciples, right? Is care and support. With 15 folks in a room, you can know about their lives. You can know intimate details about each other and where their walk with Jesus Christ. You can care for each other. You can really show a lot of emotional support for each other. You can also learn together real well and serve together real well. That is a size of human capacity for in-depth relationships. Some of y'all have churches that try to have Sunday schools that have 30 or 40. What happens to the intimacy connection after 15 though, right? It stops working. Right. And we wonder, why is our small group having problems? Well, we never did a divide cell system where after you get to a certain number, you automatically divide. You hadn't built those systems in. And you went from a care and support to more an extended family. Now, my wife has, let's see, her dad was one of 8 kids. So there's a family reunion, and it's odd, it's kind of funny. Even with all the grandkids, all the nieces and nephews, we always have 75. It's kind of funny, huh? I've been going to her annual Christmas family reunions for years. There's always 75. Now, here's the thing with that. At 75, you don't know everyone's intimate details of their life. In fact, some folks, you know, just to tell them, hey, could you move your car? Right? But that extended family, does that sound true to you? And you notice in an extended family, you may not know all the intimate details, but you pretty much know everyone's name. In a church, you know the general dynamics. You know whose kids probably belong to who, generally speaking. You know people well enough to go, Matthew, I'm sorry, you're in my seat. Right, that's my pew. Right, you know that part. I mean, at that size, you have some information on each other, and you're able to have that extended family connection. And you notice, and we'll talk about church stats in a second, a lot of our churches, they max out that 50 to 75 in attendance, 75 being the active membership, 50 being the actual weekly attendance. Churches have a hard cap there. Just a hard cap there. They've reached the emotional capacity of the family. And think of it this way. How many extended families, when there's a married couple, now both families actually get together for the wedding, right? Then you got to have the debate, whose family do I see at Thanksgiving? Whose family do I visit at Christmas? You never get to say, do we get to have both sides of the family come? Well, for the wedding, that's it. Also, you're getting there at that level because 75 active people, knowing that there's also a lot of other human connections, that's hitting the capacity of most pastors to be able to relate to people. The max for most relationships is usually around 200, but that's in life. So that means 75, I mean, I've served pastor, that's my outer edge for being able to engage people. And so for pastors, that's the end of our fingertips. That's the end of our comfort level because that's how many folks we can relate to and go visit in the hospital and call up. And so we have a tendency to provide a pretty hard barrier ourselves too as clergy. How many clergy, how many lay? How many clergy we got here? How many lay we got here? Okay. So we max out the church because that's our comfort level too. There is a larger size and it's called the community size. And it can't no longer live as like the clan level or whatever you want to say. Part of Arkansas has that Scotch-Irish kind of feel to it. The group switches from an extended family to more of a community group, and that becomes the size of a lot of our what used to be called, and really is still a program-sized church. And we'll talk about that hard level too in a second. But you see how this is sociology, and it seems to match not only our understandings that we kind of get, in our gut, but also it'll match our church sizes. And here's what I mean by that: small churches. A few years ago, I was asked to go to Church Resurrection to a small church workshop because CORE is, of course, one of our largest churches, not the largest, United Methodist Church, and they were having all these visitors come, and Debbie Nixon, one of the managing executive directors, says, we need something for small churches. And I said, what do you mean by small? And he says, small, like, 200 or something. So I kind of looked it up. We kind of went back and forth. I said, okay, how about this? Look at this number. 59% of Protestant churches worship under 100. 59%. But let's get real. 59% worship under 100, 35%, 100 to 500. That sliver is our big churches, that little sliver. Now here's what's frustrating around that. You open up your Cokesbury catalog, a lot of the books on leadership are written from that perspective. But most of our churches are not. And let's get real honest. This is Arkansas. 82% of our churches are worship under 100. Over 50%, well over 50%, worship under 50. A bigger chunk is under 25. That's our numbers. We only have 4 churches that worship over 1,000 in Arkansas. I looked up central Pennsylvania because Susquehanna is kind of a hard thing to gauge because of the mergers and changes of names. But here's 1 to 100 in average worship attendance. You see this is that same kind of size, that 100 in worship. In other words, most of those are living in that, not that big community size. They're living in the extended family size. So that's that group right there. And you see the smaller ones, the larger churches being a smaller number. So, back in the 80s, and actually an Episcopalian church developer, back part of that church growth movement, did some studies and wrote some of the basic structures of how we talk about congregational size. You've seen these titles as you read literature about the church, right? It talks about family size and program. This language has been around for decades. Alban Institute took that and ran with it. Some of y'all remember the Alban Institute, great materials, family system stuff, all that. But so the numbers they have here, I've adjusted slightly, but they're still not. Here's the thing about worship attendance. Frequency's killing us. Yeah. Worship attendance, it's hard to use it. So I'm getting down to the point where I'm saying worship attendance is a horrible number to gauge congregations. It's also the best number I have to gauge congregations. I know I can use it as a tool. It's not a hammer, it's a tool to understand. But so family size up to 50. I'd say nowadays, maybe up to 35-ish, maybe 40. 50's pushing it because frequency. Now, if I say active members, it's a little bit closer. Pastoral size or pastor-centered. What's called program. I don't care for the name program because I think we talk about programming, but that's the term used, and then corporate was the next term. It's still helpful because if you think about it using that Dunbar effect on how people relate, it matches up. You got your Sunday school class, you get a couple of them together, maybe with a matriarch or patriarch, you got your family size. Pastoral, you're hitting the limit of the community. When you're trying to put together multiple communities is when you get into these other sizes and how they relate to each other. But here's what I want to say with all those sizes. Every church, regardless of size, has a God-given potential to make a God-sized impact in its community. And differently sized congregations have different challenges. And I want to use the term challenges. These worksheets you have in front of you, I didn't say problems. I said challenges. For example, let me talk about our smaller churches, our pastoral-sized churches. They have common challenges they're facing to try to live in to be vital, God-impact congregations. For example, one challenge of a smaller congregation is claiming a vision that exists beyond this family. it's hard. In the same way, how many of you have family get-togethers, family reunions, where you go to a mission project together? It doesn't really happen, right? You get together, have a family reunion to get together and have that community being built up with each other. And every time, we're Methodists, most of us in this room, every time we get together, it's a family reunion. That's how we think of our worship. It's been that way since we worshiped under the shade trees. Family reunions are our way of thinking about church. So for pastoral size, it's hard to get beyond that. It's a vision issue. Another one is faith sharing and mentoring of new people is a challenge. Because usually the only way to get into a family is to marry into it or be born into it. So it's hard to integrate new people into the system. And you can't use the off-the-shelf membership, acculturation, or connections ministry, because those are systems designed to get 50 people into the church, not one person into the church. So you have to do more of a mentoring model, not a programmatic model. So all those things that talk about programs, you can't use. It doesn't fit. It's the fishbowl that doesn't fit. Let's talk about that. This is a chart for Arkansas on attendees per new member. So let me help you understand there. So in different size churches, church size groupings, so this is average attendance, so 500, it takes 9 attendees, 9.5 for every new member. Here's a challenge for small churches. It takes a lot more attendees for every new member. In fact, it matches. Now, professions of faith in Arkansas is a little hard because in Arkansas, everyone was a member of a church somewhere, so we don't do much baptizing because they were baptized somewhere. Sometimes they've been baptized 3 or 4 times before they come to a Methodist church. It just matters how many revivals they've been to where they sang "Just As I Am" and waited for people to come up. So, but for professions of faith, in a 0 to 25 attendance church, our average is that it takes 44 members for every new profession of faith. That means we're underwater. That means we have a few churches that are able to incorporate new. We have some that are every couple of years. This is a challenge. Small church, and so I'm not being derogatory, I'm just saying small churches have a peculiar challenge around this that we need to be aware of and create systems accordingly. So there's that faith sharing. The last piece is, board interactions. We have a hard time figuring out governance in smaller churches. We have to do things like simplified structures to make things move. We also have this patriarch or matriarch model historically, and to figure out how does the governing board going to relate to the patriarch or matriarch. Notice I didn't say try to ignore or work around. It's just a fact of life. Now, our challenge is that a lot of our patriarch and matriarchs, they are going to join the church triumphant, or they're going to nursing homes, and we have nothing in our book of discipline on how to inherit a church from a matriarch or patriarch. And so what I've seen is actual children of the matriarch or patriarch then have a family fight on who runs the church and who inherits the mantle. And the rest of us get to be witnesses. And it's an interesting place to be in. So that's a unique challenge. Also, the pastor's role. We teach our pastors in seminary that you're the CEO of the church. And in a family-sized church, if you go in and say, well, I'm the CEO of the church, they will CEO you right on out of there. And because that's not your job. Your job instead at that size is to be a chaplain for the community and a coach to the matriarch or patriarch. So, if Matthew's the patriarch of the church, I don't say, we're having a congregational meeting, Matthew, I hope you'll be there. We say, Matthew, I have this idea for ministry, and I was thinking about, and what do you think if, and what would be our first step on that? And well, you think about it, and we'll check in. And if Matthew thinks it's a good idea, we'll do it. So my leadership method is not by being in front. My leadership method is by being a coach to the one person who has the most leverage in the system. It's a different pastoral role. It uses different gifts. Then you have our next size church, the pastoral size church. In that size, a challenge is overwhelming expectations because you are the communications and relational hub of the whole church. Everything is spinning through you, and this is a role that I think of it like, chief caregiver, all that. I think of it like trying to be Martha in a Mary world, right? You're in the kitchen. Jesus, everyone wants to sit in front of Jesus' lap like Mary, but you are busy banging the pots and pans around, just being as busy as you can because you're the hub and you've got to provide everything. And we are a to-do, getting things done people. We're a Martha people, and we're busy, and Jesus is always saying, Martha, Martha, Martha. That's who we are. So it can be overwhelming for a pastor. Supervision of staff. Well, a lot of the staff are unpaid staff, or they're part-time church member staff. So, and they say, churches say, well, we want to help you out, preacher. And that's code for you're not visiting enough. And we want to help you out. We're going to hire this extra person. And they think, oh, that'll mean we can have more of our pastor's time. And they can keep on connecting everybody. The problem is, by hiring somebody, we just drew away more of their time doing supervision. And so now they're supervising the staff member, which takes time. And the folks are not getting what they expected to get on their return for the investment. So again, we have to unpack what staff does here. Leadership and board work is messy on this size church. You have some unelected leaders, you have some ministry team leaders, you got all these people, you have some part-time staff, and you have some elected governing officers, and you're supposed to make decisions with this messy group. And this is the time when you start having to systemize your follow-up. So you can kind of imagine. Notice I didn't say this church size better than the last church size. I said they're different with different challenges. Now, where this is kind of helpful is using these kind of sheets that I will be digging into, is by having honest conversations with your board about the challenges and it not being blame-based. You know, we would only grow if we didn't have to deal with the matriarch and patriarch. No, those are the relational systems. They just are. That's sociology. The question is then, how can we be most vital and how do we manage these challenges together? There's no one's fault. It's just the challenges of our size. But there's also similarities across all the sizes. I did one of these kind of workshops at Resurrection. And if you've ever been there, it's a really, fancy church. All the newest, nicest stuff. You know, as the song says, everything's new in Kansas City, right? So I asked them, what did you notice? What did you notice? And I went into this not knowing what they'd say. And we did one of those Mentimeter polls. Have you ever done that where you can dial into your phone? It's a lot of fun. And I thought, well, will they talk about the facilities? Will they talk about the gee whiz worship? The media, the stained glass? What did they notice? Out loud, y'all. Smiles. Greeters. Signs is pretty big, yeah. That's what they noticed. So here's the thing. I served some big churches, $1 million budgets, all that. I have no line item called smiles. I've served small churches, shoestring budgets. No budget line for smiles. Folks notice relationships, they notice your heart first. So that's the similarities. Regardless of where you mark yourself on the chart, let's be really honest and say there's some similarities that connect us all, and they really matter. And that happened to be a church that was very intentional about how they welcomed people. They saw everyone as guests. And we can do that any size church. Now, there's this structure here of the four. Susan Beaumont has taken that and run with it. And about 9 years ago, she wrote a book called Inside the Large Congregation. And what you see on the charts in front of you is taken heavily from her work. And I still shamelessly, but I try to give credit. So she has taken some of those basic sizes, especially the larger size that we used to call corporate, and expanded the definitions. Because you cannot treat a church that is worshiping 400 or 600 the same as you do 1,000 or 2,000. There are different sizes. It needs to be trimmed in more. And so what you're seeing on that chart is some of the explanation of that. And with all the sizes, here's a little picture. My son grew 9 inches one year. We bought pants at the back-to-school tax-free holiday in August, that a lot of states have. In October, when he put on his long pants, he looked like that. How do you win, right? So how do you buy pants for a growing young lad hitting adolescence? Any of y'all got kids that age or used to? How do you buy pants? You buy them and you roll them up. That's what you do. Right? You buy them a little long and you roll them up and they say, but Mom, you'll grow into them. So here's what I'll say. You know your trajectory. You know kind of your pace about where you are, where you want to go. When I was serving a church that was on one of those ledges. And we made an intentional decision in every single part of our ministries to start living into the next size. We started buying our pants a little longer because we knew if we did not start the process of buying our pants a little bit longer, we were going to turn around and look like that. And so I served a church when God really blessed the time there, and we doubled the size of that church. It wasn't a small church, but it was twice as big as when we left. But the point of it was we started buying our pants long. And in that, we learned a lot about ourselves. We learned that it's okay to change the nature of how we do pastoral care. And we stopped calling it pastoral care. We started calling it congregational care because it's the ministry of the whole congregation. I'm not saying I won't visit the hospital, but I'm saying that you'll probably see someone else first. We started changing language like that because we are intentional at you see these challenges, every one of those, and starting to live just into the next size. Now notice I didn't say tried to live 3 sizes out, right? That would be plopping systems that wouldn't fit. We started living just the next size, and sure enough, we would suddenly turn around, and that's how many people were there. Because we weren't artificially keeping the cap on. Now, likewise, let me be honest. If we're in a declining situation, we need to acknowledge that with some clarity, move out of the blame game, and start getting into right sizing there too. Because if we don't, what we're going to be doing is it's not that we're going to start losing the people we have because we're burning them out. And that church of 35 that's pretending to be 250, it would not last much longer at that pace. They needed to act more like their size, and then out of that, they can regrow. But they couldn't keep on living like that. It was killing them. And so let's get pants the right size or just the next size. So in the sheets that you have, if y'all grab those and please and have that in front of you, there are, I think, I don't have as many sections, but because I think facilities may not be in there, but there's some quick sections to run through on all this. There's different challenges, and every church, regardless of size, has a Vision for Vitality challenge. Every church, regardless of size, has a pastoral role and congregational care challenge. They're just different kinds of challenges along the way. So let me kind of give you an example there. And it was very calming for me. And again, I'm going to use a resurrection story since I've spent a chunk of my time there. I was with the new children's minister. We just hired him like 2 weeks before. We were at a session where they were going to watch we're going to hear about the children's ministry, and then we would get to go like stand behind a rope and watch it. Which, okay, cool, let's see how they do it. So I'm there with my children's minister, and we're preparing for the session. Got a big room full of people waiting, chopping at the bit to go. Meanwhile, in the next room on the other side of the air wall or whatever it was, they were prepping up for the children to come, and they had youth to help. And I still remember there was this nice young man there, I'm going to call him Jeremy, and he was saying to the leader, but what am I supposed to do? And the leader, who's now in charge of a few hundred people, is trying to tell him what to do. And finally she gave up exasperated and said, "Don't worry, Jeremy, Susan will tell you what to do." And Susan turned with these wide eyes and said, "It's my second week." And I leaned over to my new children's minister, who was still freaked out about his job, and I said, "Did you see that? Every church, regardless of size, cannot find children's people to help." Every church, regardless of size, has trouble finding middle school volunteers because we all know, and I have some, middle schoolers are demons, right? Every church, regardless of size, is going to have that trouble. But even within all that, each one of these challenges is real for every size. There's no perfect size when you stop having the challenges of growth. They're just different challenges. So if you grab that sheet there, what you'll see on that is along the top, different sizes. And then along the edge there, different the challenge statements, pastoral challenges, staff, board, all that. And then you can kind of match up along the way. One exercise I did with the church is I pulled out the full sheet. And I took a big version of this once, just huge. And I said, mark X's where you feel like we are. And it was fascinating because here it was a church worshiping several hundred. Some of their challenges they were living into were pastoral size challenges. So they were at the 150. I mean, they all got to put labels on it and see where they were. And I gave them the full chart, not because I wanted to confuse them, although it is a very complicated thing. I know looking at it, but y'all are church leaders, y'all can figure it out. I gave it to them to help folks understand that every church has its challenges. And we need to kind of come to reality on that. So you can mark kind of where you are and see what challenges are you living into. What are challenges that you're living into that we need to work on first? If you're really far behind, that's an area to work on. Like vision and purpose. What channels are being set up so that every member can have a say and stake in the church's life and ministries? You have to do it differently at every size church. They can feel involved and have ownership of the ministries. In a family-sized church, all your meetings are family meetings. In a larger church, you're going to have to be much more processed and systematic. The next piece, how can the members remain aware of and accountable to a shared vision? The larger churches actually are worse at this. Mission drift in large churches is really a thing. There's a sense of abundance, a sense of, oh, that's a great ministry idea, let's do it too, without asking the big question of, how does it fit within our vision? On this vision and vocation, here's another piece, and this is regardless of size, but it's lived out differently at every one. Does the church have a heart to bring others to Jesus? Is there a vocation around making new disciples? Because, of course, if there's not, you can do all the technical stuff you want. It's not going to change a thing. There's got to be that heart for making new disciples. If we move into clergy role, lay leadership are going to have to understand the double messages they're giving. They need to understand if you're a pastor here and you're coming here to be equipped, and they're saying, but so-and-so's in hospice, your leadership needs to know that this is important. This matters. This is about the church's future and growth. There's going to be a full congregation there to wrap their love around that person in hospice. But you need to be invested in and need to be equipped. And that's why you're here. You see the point? There's going to have to be a conversation that gets worked out with leaders. Clergy are going to have to figure out our ambivalence. Can we manage to let go of ministry and not hoard it? Can we do what the apostles did and let ministry extend beyond the reach of our fingertips and share ministry with others and not hoard it? Can we have real congregational care and not just pastoral care that really means the pastor's care? Jethro had some advice on Moses on this one. You remember this story? Right? You're exhausting yourself. You're staying up all day and all night making judgments. So get the tens and the hundreds and right? That's human systems. If you look, that's the Dunbar effect. Jethro gave good advice. We can do this together and your share ministry. The staffing section. You see the staff piece there. The big challenge on staffing is you're hitting the 175. You need staff whose priority in town is releasing gift-based ministry. In other words, equipping, deploying others. At 175, thereabouts, you're going to hit a wall. And the wall's going to be, do we have to keep on hiring staff? Because our budget can't handle it anymore. Because a lot of churches, they get up to that point by hiring just enough staff for the next size to be doers of ministry, and you get to the point the economy of scale really stops working. And from 175 to, get this, 6,000 in worship, there's no economy of scale. You start having economy of scale again around 6,000. There is no way you can hire enough staff to be doers of ministry in that whole block. Instead, you have to have equippers and deployers of ministry. Instead of hiring another children's ministry, you have to hire, like in the hospital, what do they have? The volunteer coordinator. You need to do the divine version of that. I don't really like the word volunteer, so I think it's something different, like servant disciple or something. Someone to coordinate all the gifts of the congregation, not to do it. You also hit another place on the staffing as equippers, not doers, and that is programming outpacing the capacity of the congregation. So we have over-programmed people, and we complain about all the sports things they're going to and all the practices. If we looked at our calendars, we're doing the same thing to families. We're destroying families by our programming, our expectations, instead of focusing on what's most important. Let's just have another event. Let's have another night. Let's have another... how much staffing? I'm asked that a lot. There's a lot of factors on staffing. Generally speaking, the basic number is around 50%, but some things will make it go higher. If you're in a more affluent area, if you're in a more urban area, like a downtown church, if you're a mainline like us Methodists, it's a little bit more. If you have weekday ministries, that requires more supervision and more facility staff. If you have multiple worship services with multiple styles, so that 50% starts inching up with everything I just said. And the way you go down is some other characteristics there that make it less complex. Newer churches have less staff than established churches, for instance. But there's some basic numbers there to think about as you're thinking about staffing. Because a lot of folks say, how much is too much? What should our baseline be? And some folks are freaked out when I say 50% is the baseline. But think about it. Most ministry is relational at one point or another. We don't...
Staff cost including pastors, or that's just hired staff?
That's including pastors. Yeah. So there's a ministry leadership category, lay and staff. How will we enlarge ministry that doesn't require staffing? How do we help people in the pew actually connect and go deeper? The larger the church, the more systematized that's going to have to be. You can't depend on what you used earlier with the unofficial mentoring system to bring people in, you have to now suddenly convert to having a tracking system to manage how much people are moving on discipleship pathways. Facility issues. How are you helping people through the building? That's kind of a no-brainer. As church gets bigger, it's going to be a more complex facility. Governance. There's a passage in the discipline. Did y'all go to Keiko Tan's Simplified Structure workshop? A couple of you here. That workshop is based on Mission Possible that Kay and I wrote. It's in there. Paragraph 247 says that if you want to have an alternate structure, instead of having 50 people as part of your governing boards and all your committees, you can get by on administratively with one committee. One committee is the trustees, and it is the staff parish, and it is the finance committee, and it is the church council, and you have one committee that does all the jobs of all those. You have to have a separate nominating committee, but you can do that. That story will. That's a whole other class. But I will say, the first churches that grabbed hold of this, you think would be small churches. That's what it's built for. The big churches. Ginghamsburg, right off the bat, they grabbed hold of that concept and ran with it. They immediately saw that is the decision-making group. You don't need the multiples of those. So you have one decision-making group that does strategic work. So smaller governing board, fewer standing committees. The smaller churches, you're doing it anyway, right? How many times have you been to a meeting where it's like, okay, is this fine to trustees? I'm on both. And they sit down and they vote, and then the next night or the next month, we got to go to another meeting. They sit to a different chair and they vote on the same thing. So the question is, can you get your structures in place for actual growth? Connections ministry, it changes and gets more complex. The thing there will be, can you formalize your communication beyond Aunt Sally just telling people? You got to go a little deeper there. On mission impact, the thing I'm suggesting nowadays is keynote ministries for certain size churches. And here's what I mean by that. I go on the smaller size churches, I'm really recommending finding one thing you're really good at. One keynote ministry. Instead of having 5 things, one the UMW does, and one this group does, and one how can you build community together and do it all as one group? Even if it has multiple pieces. Like, for example, if you have a food pantry and a fixing equipment with tools group and a reading tutoring group, combine all those to do it all focused on the local school. So you're painting classrooms, you're fixing up the school, you're doing a food program with the school, you're doing reading in the school, you're adopting a school, and that becomes a keynote ministry you're known in the community for. Instead of doing several things picking one thing you can be awesome and make a God-sized impact on. As you grow a little bit larger, you can expand that, and then by the time you get to the larger size churches, you need to get back in the keynote ministry business because it's known throughout the larger city then, those keynote ministries. And you have a way to leverage that to make more disciples. Now for worship, Taylor Burton Edwards did a great article on the 3 Ps. Have you all read that? It's a blog post from a few years ago. I have the link on downloadable off my website. He had a great statement. As you if you grow larger, you change the way you do worship. And it mostly affects 3 Ps. The prayers, you move from hearing about, Aunt Sally's hip and in excruciating detail during the prayer concerns into using a prayer list, into saying a printed list that is referred to. And in the larger churches, you don't really send out anything. It's more done within the group, like the Sunday school class manages that information, or the choir, or the other small group. Notice that it says after 125, it was his statement, the church will need to move to a pastoral prayer. I'd like to push that down a lot myself. But you get the idea. But notice, I visited with churches that were, 300 in worship, and they were still talking about someone's broken hip in the middle of worship. What does that do for a guest? They're checking out before worship even starts. Yeah. The peace, going from let's greet everybody, and everybody must shake everyone's hand, to turn to your neighbor language. And that's about pacing of worship. On the PR, or the announcements, people standing up and just saying things out loud, into using things like the screens and projected, maybe the pastor led for a few items. And then also, of course, you get to the point where you don't send that many, hey, y'all, everybody needs to know this. You do more of, again, targeted message toward particular populations. And when I talk about the PR and announcements piece, it's the same thing we do for segmentation for stewardship campaigns. For instance, the last time I did a stewardship campaign, I'd gotten way past sending the same letter to everyone. The last time I did one, I think I had 8 different categories, segments of the congregation. I had everything from the brand new member to the person that's never pledged before, the person that has pledged and didn't follow through. And I had a Friends of St. James category, which was the grandparents of the children in the child care and other people in the community that are connected slightly. So I gave them like a non-pledge card thing that looked like Friends of the Zoo. You get the idea. So 8 different segments of the population, from top givers to folks that don't even know that you can give to a church, and everything in between. PR has to move into that kind of thing too, where you start segmenting. So imagine for yourself taking this kind of worksheet. Okay, yeah, great. This kind of worksheet and working with your team on it. Sitting down with your board. And again, what these kind of tools give you the opportunity to do, pastors, is instead of being blaming, instead of coming in saying, our problem is that we still do blah, 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 you can tweak your language and instead use some coaching questions, use a tool like that or another tool to talk about sizes, and instead of being in front of, make it so, Matthew, you sit beside your team, have the sheet in front of you, and where do you think we are on this? And by changing your position and using the challenges that are common to all churches language, I think we're making it less threatening and less blame-focused. And again, with every one of the sizes, I want to be really clear, every church of every size can make an impact. We need to acknowledge there's differences. We also need to say, with all sizes, there needs to be a heart for growth, because growth isn't about the numbers. It's about new disciples for Jesus Christ. It's about the Great Commission. And with that, we can truly live into it. Now, what I'd love for you to do, we got a few minutes here. I'd like you to turn to your neighbor and grab those sheets with you, and each of you take a minute. You kind of heard some basics. See where your church size is and see how that challenge fits, and share with your neighbor how you might want to address one of those challenges. Just pick one challenge. And what I'd love for you to do is each of you take 1 minute to talk about a challenge. I'm going to set a timer, and I will say when your 1 minute's up and you need to switch. So everyone, you're looking at it with your partner, and let's take 1 minute to pick one challenge, and you can talk about how you might want to work on that. Go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Make sure you switch. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The Lord be with you. Awesome. So, did y'all come up with some challenges? Okay. Yes.
I want to hit you with one because it's been puzzling me as I'm sitting here.
Okay.
Many of us, I suspect, in this room have multiple point charges.
Right.
I have 3 churches that are roughly in the 50-member
Okay.
ballpark.
Yeah.
But if you add them together,
Can't add them together.
we're at 150.
That would be great if they actually lived as one organism
So
together.
How do you deal with that? Because if you
Yeah.
deal with them as small 50,
Yep.
but I've got it times 3.
Yes, but you have to engage them as they are as a family system. Each system is its own size. In the same, separately.
But the real challenge then comes on congregational care and those kinds of things.
Right.
Because I got 150.
Well, and that is why you need to move into congregational care, not pastoral care, at that size. And you might be real creative if they're close enough and have a shared congregational system with lay chaplains. That'd be a fun way you might be able to engage.
But I'm just saying that would be something for somebody like you to do some writing and work.
Oh, well, one could. I'll tell Kay, next book's coming. Yeah, so real quick, yes.
So I had this church that it's in the matriarch, patriarch size. The last 3,
Okay.
I would say matriarch, patriarchs took on that role and then died within a year in that
Right.
position in their early 50s or early 60s. So
Okay.
they were expected.
Yep, and no inheritance system in place, yep.
And now there's a vacuum.
Right.
So where do you move forward?
All right, so you're going to have to live into that board and let the board try to manage that. But I think being really honest about the matriarch-patriarch system, and that there's no system to inherit, so the way the church made decisions is going to have to change. And it's not so much based on church size, it's based on the family system. And so, and think of an extended family where grandma passes, and you're really living into that. And so it's okay to use that language. I do not have bad words for matriarch-patriarch systems. That is just the family system. That's how humans gather. And a lot of families, they understand when grandma dies. I live in a matriarchal society. I live in the American South. It's a matriarchal society. When grandma dies, families break up at times. So we need to have that conversation too. So I think the best thing is clarity in articulating the reality. Okay. So I have a silly thing. Can I take a seminar selfie with you? Okay, could everyone do a thumbs up or something like that? And I will take a seminar selfie. Hey there, thank you. Okay, I'm available afterwards. We can have discussions. Thank you so much for being with me today.